born out of Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinian population in Gaza.
All of that is true, isn't it?
I think it is tragic and appalling that South Africa has decided to play advocate for the devil and serve as the legal arm of Hamas.
I'm going to pause you there, if I may, Mr. Levy, because almost every point I put to you or every question I ask you, you respond with an answer that is not relevant to the question.
Last week, we need civilians to get out of the way.
Well, I'd like to talk to you about that order to flee. Hang on a minute.
Please.
This is an interview, and I'd like to put the questions to you
Please.
that my listeners want answered.
Please, I'm happy to hear. The United Nations cannot have its cake and eat it. It cannot say on the one hand that Israel
He is not
cannot
from the
target
United
Hamas.
Nations. He is not from the United Nations. He is from the North. Please let me ask the questions and correct you on factual matters. I have read to you a quote from Jan Egeland, who is General Secretary of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He is also a man who helped negotiate the Oslo peace accords. Would you react to the quote I put to you, please?
Thank you for that factual correction.
Hello everybody. So the guy Eylon Levy, who was one of the most notorious faces of Israeli propaganda in the last 6 months, has been suspended by his government. Not because there has suddenly been an awakening of morality for Israel's Zionist government, but it's because British Foreign Office reportedly registered an official complaint, for his tweet that he had posted in response to David Cameron's tweets about the need for the more corridors to be open for the trucks carrying food materials for Gazans or for people in Gaza to go through. So that was the context. Anyway, so the guy is suspended. So it's good time to look back at his famous TV appearances where he often peddled lies. On some channels he got away, on other channels he wasn't. In fact, on BBC with certain presenters he could not get away, like Victoria Derbyshire on Newsnight. On Channel 4, Krishnan Gurumurthy, there were famous encounters of him, a couple of encounters that I can think of, where he was given grief. LBC, Sangeeta Maiska, my former BBC colleague, she was, in fact, one interview that she conducted in October that it's worth watching, and I'm going to play snippets of that. So let's start with Talk TV. As you know, Talk TV, Murdoch's outlet, you would expect it to be nothing, better than a propaganda outlet. There are two cartoons who appear, who disguise themselves as TV news presenters. They were interviewing Eylon Levy, and Levy being Levy, of course, he was peddling lies, unchallenged, and much to his comfort. These two so-called anchors sympathized with him and said, why is Israel not countering, those facts, that is resulting in bad PR for the country? Why is Israel not countering with their own version of propaganda? To which Eylon Levy says, oh, he is such a saint, he is a spokesperson who is not supposed to lie. This was on Talk TV.
How can ordinary people, because all we're seeing on the media around the world at the moment are people who are dead and they're supposed to be, civilians, we don't know, but we're not seeing any real propaganda coming back from your side?
Well, first of all, you're quite right that we don't put out propaganda. We're a liberal democratic state with a professional army and civil service. We don't play the same games as terrorist organizations. But, I was on the radio, other spokespeople were on the radio explaining exactly what Hamas did yesterday. It tells the whole world that Israel attacked an ambulance, and immediately it becomes clear that Hamas was using that ambulance in grave violation of international law in order to ferry terrorists around. So we're making that case. Unfortunately, the terrorists in the Gaza Strip have shock value on their side. They have no compunctions about lying. We're professional spokespeople. We have to check the truth. We have to tell the truth. We have to check the truth.
Now let's start with a few clips of LBC, the interview that Sangeeta Maiska, formerly with the BBC, now with the LBC, did. She did way back in October. That time, if you remember, Israelis were expecting 1.1 million people from northern Gaza to move southwards, with the notice period of just 24 hours. That's how cruel they were. So Sangeeta Maiska asked the justification, behind such cruel move, and she quoted the head of Norwegian Refugee Council, who was also a person instrumental in the signing of Oslo Accord. How it went.
More suffering. We don't want civilians to get hurt. But in order for civilians not to get hurt, in order for us to be able to target Hamas's infrastructure, in order for us to be able to get to every single terrorist who was involved in the atrocious ISIS-style massacres that took place last week, we need civilians to get out of the way.
Well, and I'd like to talk to you about that order to flee. I would hang on a minute.
Please.
This is an interview, and I'd like to put the questions to you
Please.
that my listeners want answered.
Please, I'm happy to hear.
On the issue of the order to flee, which is an order to 1.1 million Palestinians in the north of Gaza to move southward, and your original time frame was 24 hours. Jan Egeland, General Secretary of the Norwegian Refugee Council, and a man who, as you know, helped broker the Oslo peace accords, says the Israeli order for civilians to move from north to south is impossible and illegal. It amounts to forcible transfers and a war crime. That's right, isn't it?
No, absolutely not. And let me explain why. The United Nations cannot have its cake and eat it. It cannot say on the one hand that Israel
He is not
cannot
from the
target
United
Hamas.
Nations. He is not from the United Nations. He is from the North. Please let me ask the questions and correct you on factual matters. I have read to you a quote from Jan Egeland, who is General Secretary of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He is also a man who helped negotiate the Oslo peace accords. Would you react to the quote I put to you, please?
Thank you for that factual correction.
So for a change, he concedes. He concedes and he thanks Sangeeta Maiska for the factual correction. Mind you, if this interview had taken place on other outlets, I don't think many presenters would have, had the courage or even desire to fact check him. So let's go to another one. Now, this is really classic. So to justify that why Israel is not responsible for the rising number of civilian casualties, he blamed the local, the international aid agencies working locally, that they have been asking the local populations to not vacate their houses. And that was the reason why the civilian casualties have been so high.
And I would argue that what is impeding our efforts to minimize civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip is certain members of the international community telling the residents of Gaza that they should not be vacating. And tragically, we have evidence that Hamas...
Sorry, just to interrupt once more. I do apologise, but I must jump in. Did you just
That's
say humanitarian agencies are telling Gazans not to move? Is that what I just heard you say?
I'm saying that instead of urging them to comply with Israel's advice to clear out temporarily from the combat zones, they are saying that this is impossible.
I mean, on other channels, you would have perfectly, got away with that. You would have absolutely got away with that. Nobody would have even bothered. But credit to Sangeeta that she pointed it out and decided to ask him for clarification whether he indeed, meant what he was saying. So then, to which then he immediately changed his tune. So another lie caught here. Then there was a great interview on Newsnight. In fact, I can just go on and on and on because the guy has given countless of interviews in the whole crisis. But then one of the most notable interviews that was done was by Victoria Derbyshire on Newsnight on BBC Two. You can trust Victoria, for not giving an easy time to her guest. And on this occasion also, she did almost, full justice to her role. You watch this interview.
I'm going to play you a small clip from one of the submissions from one of the lawyers today. Have a watch of this.
Each day, yet more desperate people will be forced to relocate from where they are sheltering, or will be bombed in places where they have been told to evacuate to. Entire multi-generational families will be obliterated, and yet more Palestinian children will become WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family, the terrible new acronym born out of Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinian population in Gaza.
All of that is true, isn't it?
I think it is tragic and appalling that South Africa has decided to play advocate for the devil and serve as the legal arm of Hamas.
I'm going to pause you there, if I may, Mr. Levy, because almost every point I put to you or every question I ask you, you respond with an answer that is not relevant to the question.
Well, let me answer directly then. The
Please.
lawyer there who is serving as the legal representative of Hamas, accusing Israel of genocide, is presenting a topsy-turvy reality in which Hamas does not exist, it hasn't taken hostages, Israel decided one bright morning to start bombing Gaza. On October 7th, we suffered an act of genocide. We suffered an act of genocide when Hamas invaded our country and burned, beheaded, tortured, mutilated, raped and abducted as many people as it could, as brutally as it could. And in response, we have launched a defensive campaign with very clear objectives: to destroy the Hamas regime so that it cannot hurt our people again, and to bring back the hostages who are still trapped in the terror dungeons. Those goals are very clear, and we have been pursuing them in full accordance with international law.
And that is disputed. I want to ask you about these comments made by Israeli politicians since October the 7th, and hopefully we can bring up the quotes. Here we are. This is your president. It's an entire nation out there that's responsible. He's referring to Gazans. Have a look at this. The next one. We are now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. Nakba, as people know, is a term for catastrophe after the 1948 war, a war used by Palestinians about ethnic cleansing. And we all have one common goal: erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Can you see why some people believe that you absolutely don't want Palestinians any longer in Gaza?
We think we have been very clear, both in word and in deed.
In those words?
Well, Mr. Vatouri does not make decisions on security matters in Israel. We think we've been very clear, both in word and in deed, that the people of Gaza are not our enemy. Our enemy is the Hamas regime, and that is why we have gone further than any army in the history of the world to try to get civilians out of harm's way. Now, we just had the former...
I'm going to bring you back to the words of those politicians, if I may. We're now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. Nakba, the Palestinian term for ethnic cleansing. Those are the words of a government minister in your government.
Talk about a little bit of historical context, what the Palestinians referred to as the Nakba.
I'm just asking you about those words.
No, so I want to talk about that word Nakba. When the Palestinians use the word Nakba, they are referring to the consequences of the decision in 1948 to try to scuttle the creation of a Jewish state under the UN General Assembly resolution. They declared war in 1948. That war of annihilation did not go their way, and there were consequences as a result.
And how is that relevant to what your government minister has said now? Because what he is saying is we want to get rid of these people.
No, we do not want to get rid of these people. We have been very clear in word and in deed as a government, and as the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister have said, that we urge civilians to get to safety in the safe zone. We've been urging them to go to the safe zone.
There are no safe zones, you know that.
There is no... The Al-Mawasi zone has been rendered unsafe because Hamas has decided to shoot rockets out of it. Hamas decided to shoot rockets out of it, and the United Nations has said absolutely nothing about rockets being fired.
People near the Rafah crossing.
And it is absolutely tragic that Hamas continues to double down on its human shield strategy. I don't know whether your viewers understand the extent to which in the last 16 years Hamas redesigned Gaza's cityscape in order to hide its military assets underneath civilian areas. And we have made extensive warnings for civilians to leave. We've placed 70,000 individual phone calls, dropped 7 million leaflets, 14 million phone calls, 14 million text messages. We have been going more than any army in history, and I'm quite happy to be fact-checked, more warnings than all armies in the history of counter-terrorism warfare put together to urge civilians to get out of harm's way. They are not our enemy. Our enemy is the rapist regime that perpetrated
There is no such thing out of harm's way in Gaza. I'm going to pause you there because we're out of time.
We would like the creation of safe areas, and we would like the UN to cooperate with us instead of condemning Israel for designating safe zones, which is what they have spuriously been doing.
There's no such thing as a safe area in Gaza.
So just imagine, what was the highlight of this interview? Because South Africans decided to expose Israelis before the International Court of Justice, so they had an agenda and they needed to be criticized by this guy. Because their own Israeli ministers have been talking about ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So therefore, instead of kind of criticizing them, he said, oh, they had nothing to do with the sort of like broader war strategy. So therefore, their messages or their warnings should not be taken seriously. I mean, seriously? I mean, is he for real? I mean, I can understand your job as a spokesperson to go and put up a defense for your country. But at a time when 35,000 people have been killed by your army, and of them, about 15 to 16,000 children, 70% of those casualties are children and women. You're talking about, 1,200 deaths. Absolutely tragic. Absolutely tragic what happened on 7th of October. But if you are concerned about 7th of October, how can you not be concerned about your own actions that have left more than 35,000 people dead? And what kind of a strategy is it? You're talking about democracy, you're talking about following international law. If your goal was to eradicate Hamas, surely it's your responsibility to make sure how you do that. The response should not be to go and just flatten the entire Gaza. And guess what? You have still not eradicated Hamas, and you will never be able to eradicate Hamas, because by your action you have created, many more thousands of Hamas. What do you think all those people, all those children who are orphaned, all those people whose entire family members have been wiped off by your brutality, by your genocidal act, do you think they are gonna they're gonna praise Israel? Or they are gonna turn to the ideology of Hamas? And how can you blame them? Who is responsible? You are responsible. And then you have these jokers like Eylon Levy and his the other colleagues to come and appear on TV channels, and most of the TV channels give them free ride, except for few right-minded individuals like Sangeeta Maiska or Victoria Derbyshire or Krishnan Gurumurthy of Channel 4. All these people who still feel the urge to protect the basic ethos of journalism. Otherwise, broadly we know the journalism is dead even in this country. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways that you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.